This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode, alongside my co-host Bob Pastorella, we chat with the world's best writers about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Today is the second part of our conversation with Philip Fracassi. Now, last episode we spoke about Philip's writing routine, his journey from indie to traditionally published author, and some of his marketing non-negotiables. This time around we are talking about a variety of matters, including his latest novel, the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, and some of the things that he has planned for the future. So, get ready for another wonderful and inspiring conversation with Philip Fracassi. But beforehand, a quick advert break.
It was as if the video had unzipped my skin, slunk inside my tapered flesh, and become one with me.
From the creator of This is Horror comes a new nightmare for the digital age, The Girl in the Video by Michael David Wilson. After a teacher receives a weirdly arousing video, his life descends into paranoia and obsession. More videos follow, each containing information no stranger could possibly know. But who's sending them, and what do they want? The answers may destroy everything and everyone he loves. The Girl in the Video is The Ring meets Fatal Attraction for the iPhone generation. Available now in paperback, ebook, and audio. From the host of This is Horror Podcast comes a dark thriller of obsession, paranoia, and voyeurism. After relocating to a small coastal town, Brian discovers a hole that gazes into his neighbor's bedroom. Every night she dances and he peeps. Same song, same time, same wild and mesmerizing dance. But soon Brian suspects he's not the only one watching, and she's not the only one being watched. Their watching is The Wicker Man meets Body Double with a splash of Suspiria. They're Watching by Michael David Wilson and Bob Pastorella is available from thisishorror.co.uk, Amazon, and wherever good books are sold.
Okay, with that said, here it is. It is Philip Fracassi on This is Horror. So one of the reasons that we are talking today is because you recently released a brand new novel, The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. Firstly, incredible title.
Yeah.
I want to know, how did this one come about? How did you conceive of such an amazing and an original idea that for some reason just nobody's thought to combine a slasher with a retirement home, but it absolutely works.
I think nobody was callous enough to suggest such a thing. But here I am. Yeah, the story is, I actually do remember the inflection point for this, is that my wife and I were touring for Boys in the Valley in 2023, and we were staying at a hotel in Virginia, and it was this Marriott, and it was at the top of this hill, a beautiful green country, and at the top of this hill was like these old historical, like Civil War era buildings, and they turned it into a Marriott hotel, but it was almost like a compound. It's like 3 or 4 buildings, and beautiful landscaping, green hills as far as the eye could see, just gorgeous location. And we were going for a sunset stroll, and I just casually mentioned, I said, this place feels more like a retirement home than a hotel. And then that part of the horror writer's brain that we all have kicked in and said, oh, that's interesting. What if we said a horror story in a retirement home? What would that look like? And then I was like, oh, what if there was like a serial killer in a retirement home? That would be interesting. And what would that look like? And how would people respond to that? And how would the residents react? And how could they react physically and emotionally and psychologically? And all of a sudden, it just became this runaway train in my brain. And my wife, God bless her, and I were just like talking about it in different ways. Elderly people could die and kind of funny, different, quirky ways. And it just took root. And I went back to my hotel room and I opened my laptop and I opened a Word document and I typed the words, the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. And I wrote a couple paragraphs about just like the residents of Autumn Springs have a good life and they have this and there's this and this and this. But then until this happens. And it was just like two paragraphs. It was like a spilling of my brain. And I sent that to my agent and I went to dinner. And the next morning I opened my email and my agent had replied and said, holy shit, you've got to write this book. And so I started thinking about it more. And then in a few days I was in New York City for a book event. And I had drinks with my editor at Tor before the event. And I said, hey, by the way, I had this kind of a weird idea for a book. I said, it's called the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. And it's about a serial killer in a retirement home. And she was like, oh my God, I love it. And away we went. And then I was like, okay, this is my next book. But that was the start. That was the impetus. That was the catalyst, was just walking around this weird Marriott and just having that thought. It was just, when it comes to like the whole, where do you get your ideas thing? The other, it's all about that what if worm, in our brains, and we just lean dark. Like we were talking about Alter earlier, and people have asked me about Alter, how I thought of Alter, and I was like, I was laying beside a pool. It was a beautiful sunny day. I was by myself. There were birds chirping in the trees. It was the most placid, afternoon you could think of. And I was staring at that pool and I thought, what would happen if a sinkhole opened up underneath that pool? And what would happen if that pool was filled with children? And that was Alter. Other things came, grew. Other things, made it into the story, expanded. But yeah, it's just that it was just a what if, and then the way the brain. And if I'll tell you, if I have an idea like that, a thought like that, and it won't go away, and I can't stop thinking about it, and all of a sudden characters are popping up and talking and walking around and doing stuff. If I can start seeing the settings and start seeing specific scenes of action, that's when I know I've got an idea that's sticky and that it's an idea that I'm excited about. And those are the ideas I tend to write it.
And speaking of seeing scenes, I mean, I understand what made the composition of this one a little bit distinct from others is it's the only book that you haven't fully planned before going in and actually writing it. So I'm wondering, what kind of challenges were there in approaching it differently? What perhaps advantages were there? And did you find that you ever had to backtrack a little bit and modify things if you were essentially, I suppose, pantsing it or doing it in a more hybrid way rather than the strict, meticulous planning that you've done previously?
Yeah. So, yeah, most of my books are to your point, heavily outlined. my novels for sure. And yeah, it was the weirdest thing. For whatever reason, Autumn Springs refused to be outlined. And to this day, I don't know why, but I have a going back to process. So my process with a novel is, once I have the idea, I open a Word document, and for some reason that I can't explain, I go into all caps and I just write the idea. I vomit out the book. Blah 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 blah. This happens. This happens. This happens. This happens. This happens. And it's just like a raw, like a raw data spill. And then I open up a Scrivener program and I start meticulously going through chapter by chapter by chapter. Here's what happens. Here's what happens. And I usually have like a couple scenes, like, okay, this scene's in Act 3, this scene's in Act 2. But but by the time I'm done, it's a chapter by chapter breakdown of every single chapter, what happens in the chapter, who the characters are, what information I'm giving, who the conflict is. Like, it's very, very almost, creepily detailed. And I do all that before I start writing the book, because I don't want to start writing the book. I don't want to ever be writing a book and be going like, gee, I wonder what happens next. Or what am I going to do after this chapter? Or what am I going to do next? Or how am I going to get this person from point A to point B? So I'm from an outliner. So to your point, though, yeah, I could not outline this book. And I had the characters, I had a few scenes, but that was it. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know who was going to survive. I didn't know who the killer was. And but I was like, man, I've got to start writing. Like, after beating my head against the desk for a couple of weeks, I was finally like, I just got to start writing this thing. Because I sold it. I got a deadline. And so I just started writing, and it was so I pantsed the whole thing. I didn't know who the killer was until like 3/4 of the way through the book. I didn't know how the book was going to end until I wrote the last chapter. And but to answer your question, it was a very, very educational process. It was very interesting to me. It was I learned a lot writing this book, more so than I probably learned since I wrote Child Alone with Strangers, which is my first book. And yeah, I've learned. I would say that it was fun I get why people do it. I understand the element of surprise. I understand the element of discovery as the writer, and I get why why that's exciting, and I get why it's enticing for writers. For me, while I enjoyed having those moments, I was so anxious about the rest of the book that I it's not something I would want to do again if I could help it. I like knowing where the story's going. I don't mind. I'm not going to get bored if I know how it ends. I like writing so much that I enjoy writing, literally writing. So I don't need the story to be the impetus for why I'm excited to be at the keyboard. So I just want the story to be done so I can write. Like, I'm kind of the other way around in a way. I want to focus on the prose. I want to focus on the characterizations. I want to focus on dialogue. And again, like I said, I don't want to think about what happens next. I want to know what's going to happen next. And also, when you're writing a mystery thriller, like this is a really whodunit mystery, there's red herrings, your seeding information, there's misdirection, and all that stuff's got to be baked into, preferably, an outline. So when I wrote Autumn Springs, I did have to go back and kind of redo a lot of stuff that I would not have done in in one of my other novels. Most of the time, like take whatever, Gothic, for example. I would write the book. I would do a second pass, which I'm basically sweetening the prose. I'm cleaning stuff up. I'm making sure everything is nice and tidy. And then I'll do one more polish. And then that's pretty much what I turn in. With Autumn Springs, I did a pretty major overhaul after I finished the book, and then did another pass where I sweetened it all up and did that what I call the sweetening draft, and then a polish, and then I turned it in, and then my editors said, there's this element that you have throughout the entire book that we feel is giving away too much information. We want you to take that out. And it was like a certain POV. And I was like, well, no, the book doesn't work without the tone of the book doesn't work without that. And so we had a back and forth about it. And I ultimately ended up agreeing with them and understood their perspective. And so I changed it. But that's something I would have never had. I think if I outlined it ahead of time, I probably would not have run into that problem. So it was very interesting. It was very educational. Like I said, I learned a ton. I still prefer outlining. But I think for this book, it ended up working out. I mean, there's so much, like if I were looking back on it, I don't know how I did it because there's 80 characters in this book. There's 80 residents at Autumn Springs. You meet a lot of them as a reader. There's detectives, there's administrators, there's staff, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. And to have it all tie together at the end was maxing out my brain power, to have it all tie together at the end. And when you're outlining, you can kind of do all that construction work ahead of time and you can kind of piecemeal it. And I think when you're writing you're looking at the whole project at once, and you're kind of trying to see, you're like 38,000 feet, your bird's eye, you're trying to see the whole thing and be like, okay, what doesn't work? Where do I got to make an adjustment or make a tweak to, so that was a different way of approaching it. But, yeah, ultimately it worked out. I think people seem to be, no complaints, or not a lot of complaints anyway. So yeah, it was cool. I just never want to have to do it again.
Do you think that the momentum that you had with the idea was what made it, like internal momentum, the momentum to get it out? Like you said, hey, I got to start writing this thing. Do you think that was what made it outline resistant? Was the actual, hey, there was a drive there that you had that kind of took over?
Maybe, but I kind of feel like I'm that way about all my novels. Because I like outlining. I like the construct. I like building the framework. For me, it's fun. I mean, that's really when you're constructing the story, and then the writing is the writing. But no, I don't know why. I believe me, I've noodled over it, and I don't know why. But for whatever reason, I think this book is so tonally all over the place. So for example, if you take Boys in the Valley is very much a one note book. It's stoic, it's dark, and it's it's kind of, it's just there's no color, there's no fun, there's no quirkiness. It's like this is like a straight down the middle horror novel. With Autumn Springs, there was so much color, there was so much vibrancy, there were so many colorful, interesting, quirky characters, there was so much personality, to that I think it was almost maybe too much for me to structure in that way. I think I had to kind of just like, I think I just had to like drive up to the entrance and get out of my car and and walk in and sort of just experience this place and these people. And I think that's what it was. I think there was too much there's too much to nail down in a beat by beat story outline. There was too many influencers to could change things on the fly. So I think if you've read the book, you'll know how many characters there are in this book and how they're all so unique, and they all kind of influence the story a little bit depending on how they respond to things. So I think it was just too much, and I just had to get there and just hope that the characters would guide me to the right beats. And I think that's ultimately what ended up happening. I was following Rose Dubois around, waiting to see what she was going to do next, probably with about as much anticipation and mystery as people were reading the book. So I think that was it. Just ended up being really character driven versus plot driven, and I think that's part of the reason why I couldn't outline it.
Right. I think you said in a previous interview that Rose Dubois appeared fully formed, and almost more fully formed than a lot of your characters have previously. So it sounds like, there's a crossover there with it being difficult to outline, because you've got this character who she's almost got autonomy and agency, and it's like, well, you can
Yeah.
outline if you want, but I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Rose, you 100%. I mentioned in the afterword too. Like she arrived fully formed. She's a very powerful character. She's a very driven woman. She knows what she wants. She's whip smart. And yeah, I think, like I said, I think there probably was an element of like, I'm just going to follow Rose around and see what happens, and see what she does, for sure. And I think that you could say the same for, and then I think throwing in like like I said, some of these other characters, and like the three sisters, and Igor and Stan and Mickey and Gopi and Miller and all these guys, and like how are they all gonna, Maureen Stapleton, even like all these different characters, like they're all gonna have an effect on what happens, and I don't know what that effect is going to be until I get there. So I think that's kind of the difference. Like I said, like with Boys in the Valley, which is got like there's very real characters in that book and very complex characters in that book. It's not, when I say characterization, I'm not suggesting I'm not giving enough depth to the characters. But I mean by characterization or characters overtaking the story is that the characters are almost they're driving the story. I mean, I guess that's true of everything. I'm trying to wish I could say it better, but I feel like they were kind of in charge. I guess put it that way. Whereas Boys in the Valley, I was kind of, I was still God. I was still putting them into positions and seeing how they would react. But I think with Autumn Springs, I was much more like on Earth, one of the fellow residents, just trying to see how it was all going to shake out. So it was cool and it was fun. And that's why that's one of the things that's great about writing is you're never really 100% sure what kind of experience you're going to have with a story or how you're going to interact with that story. I remember I mentioned Blue Butterfly a couple times, and that book is coming out, but just hasn't been announced yet. But I outlined that book meticulously because that also is it's not a whodunit, but it's a mystery. It's a mystery thriller. And I think I was right around the third act, head of the third act. And my main character, I was writing the scene and she did something completely different than what I had planned. And it was very frustrating for me. It made me very upset. And it changed the rest of the book. And I had to go back to my outline and sort of like refigure it all. So, so sometimes sometimes you don't know how it's going to all work out, but you kind of you got to, I am in service to the story, and everything that I do is in service to the story. Every character, every description, every scene, is in service to the story. So, the way I write, the tone of the story, all is in service to the story. So I think, every story is different because everything's going to have a different way of being told.
And it's interesting to learn that you didn't know exactly how it was going to end until essentially it ended. You didn't know what the final page was going to be, what the final line was going to be.
No.
And yet, after a novel of absolute chaos and despair, particularly, that kind of final act, in that final line, you just give us this gift that I didn't even see coming, because you give us hope. And it's the perfect ender. It's the perfect final line. Like I felt chills when I finished it. It was so satisfying. It's such a good line. And I like that I've been vague enough that it hasn't spoiled it at all for anyone, but it was perfect.
Oh, thank you. I mean, yeah. So I'll give you an example. When I was writing the last chapter, this is no spoiler, guys, for those listening. When I wrote the final chapter of that book, I had in my head, I have one more chapter, and I knew what that next chapter was. That last chapter was going to be, and it was going to be a pretty important chapter. And then I wrote what is now the last chapter, and when I finished it, I was like a dealer at the blackjack table. I was like, hands up, dusting him off. That's it. That's the end. And I changed, it ended up changing a big part of the book because, like I said, I had something else in mind. So yeah, so it was interesting to write that way. And it was really satisfying, especially because the book worked. I'm not trying to blow smoke up my own ass, but the book worked, and so it's satisfying because it was written it was sort of chaos when I was writing it, but I enjoyed writing it. I had so much fun writing it. I had so much fun writing those characters, and it was very cathartic to write that story. So it was a really wonderful experience, and I'm glad that I had it.
And I think it should be obvious for people listening, but when we talk about it being a slasher, I mean, this isn't your typical slasher. This isn't your Hollywood, I suppose, more surface level slasher. This is much more along the lines of the literary slasher that you might see someone like Stephen Graham Jones write. And I mean, a lot of it is because of that emotional depth and the core that you give this book and the characters. Now, I understand, and I believe this was mentioned in the afterword as well, that during the writing of it, both of your parents passed away. And then, not only is that obviously going to change your life, but it changed the book. And so initially, it was a little bit more light-hearted. It was more a kind of dark comedy. And there are, of course, still comedic moments in it, but I don't know, did this moment in your life, it changed the way that you approached the book? Like sometimes there are moments in the world and the universe where I feel it gives us kind of what is required, even if we don't know it at the time. So that's kind of why you couldn't plan it, because you were going to be fundamentally changed during the writing process.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely going back to tone, which is a big thing for me. The two things I decide before I write anything are what's the tone and how do I want to write it? Meaning, am I going to write it fast? Am I going to write it slow? Is it going to be pulpy? Is it going to be, Third Rule of Time Travel is written with very sparse, quick prose. My upcoming novel, Serafina, is written much more densely because it's, again, going back to the service of the story. I wanted Serafina to feel richer. I wanted time travel to be more of a thriller. Anyway, I think I get sidetracked so easily. Regarding the book was originally, when I pitched it to my editor in that bar in New York City, yeah, I told her it's a dark comedy. I even riffed on a couple scenes and that are still in the book. And there's some quirky, fun stuff in the story. And then there's some really dark, emotionally, wrought moments in the story. And I think what happened, yes, my father, right in the middle of writing the book, I had to go take care of my, go back to Bow home and take care of my father, who was suffering from dementia, and basically was like home hospice care for him for a few months, and you can't go through something like that and not rethink a lot of things, especially when it comes to like end of life care or the elderly or even death or the disease of dementia or the awfulness of it. And my mom, who, passed away sometime after, when my father passed away, she and I were having a lot of conversations along with my other siblings, of course, but like, who's going to take care of me? How am I going to live? Who's going to feed me? She was an invalid basically and in a wheelchair, and, how am I going to pay for stuff? All the things that are being taken away from us right now, which I won't go into, but, so all that went into the book. And I think what happened between that and also just when I got into the book, I just started realizing that there was a lot more depth to the story that I had originally anticipated. And I really found myself wanting to address a lot of the issues around ageism and around end of life care and around the elderly and how they're thought of and how they're treated and how they're represented in media and how they're represented in real life and how they're treated in real life. And all that stuff ended up becoming important to me. I think because when I met these characters, I was kind of like, I kind of fell in love with them. I was like, you guys, I don't know. I wanted to tell their stories. And I tell people, you mentioned the slasher thing, I tell people this, this story is about Rose. This is Rose's story. This is Rose's arc. And the slasher stuff is basically the stage or the however you want to call it, the tool that I use to tell her story and to her discovering things about herself and changing as a person because of what's happening around her that's the point of this of the novel. And that quickly became the point of the novel. And I think but I also have all the fun, entertaining slasher stuff in there too. But yeah, just for all these reasons, it became a different book. And even stuff that I thought of, early on, that in my head, I was like, oh, this is going to be really funny. When I tell this, when I do this chapter, it's going to be really funny. People are going to like laugh and they're going to really get a kick out of this chapter. And then when I was writing the chapter, I was like in tears because it was so horrible. And I was like, this isn't working out the way I thought it would. This is becoming something much different. And so, yeah, so things like just, yeah, I don't know how it was, I got so immersed in this world and I got so immersed with the characters and so connected to these characters. And then obviously everything that was going on with me in my life. Yeah, it just made the story that much more meaningful. And it may have been that way, whether or not what was going on in my personal life had happened or not. I may have just entered this world and gotten to know these characters and wanted to tell their stories differently. But I think it all contributed to the way the story was told and to what the novel ended up being, which to your point from the, it's much more than just like a slasher. It's really, it's got a lot of heart. It's got a lot of my heart in it and a lot of really, I think, thematically deep issues. But my goal was to make sure that, again, going back to my mantra, everything is in service to the story. I even if I knew that I wanted to address some of these issues, at no point did I want them taking precedent over the storytelling. So they're all in service to the story, meaning I'm not bogging stuff down. I'm not standing on a soapbox and preaching. But I do think that those elements are interwoven throughout the plot, and I think add some interesting texture to what happens in the book.
Yeah, there were a number of elements that really reminded me of a coming of age story. Now,
Yeah.
of course, you can't
It's a good
call
point. Yeah.
it a coming of age because of the age of the protagonist, but I think this is kind of a coming of experience, a coming of realizations because,
Yeah.
mm, as with all good storytelling, the protagonist that we see at the beginning is not the protagonist that we see at the end through everything that she has experienced, both externally and internally, in terms of those realizations. And so, I mean, to that point, there are perhaps a lot more parallels with Boys in the Valley than one might imagine. You think they're polar opposites. You've got one where the protagonists and the main characters are 80 plus, and then you've got others that kind of 6 to 16-year-old boys, but that there is a lot of commonality, as I say.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. Very much. I would be disingenuous to not agree with you. No, I mean, to the point where there's a line in Autumn Springs where Rose is having lunch with her daughter, where, and I think it's her daughter who refers to Autumn Springs as a octogenarian orphanage, and that is very much a nod to Boys in the Valley, a very purposeful nod to Boys in the Valley. Because yeah, you're talking about, I'm taking X amount of characters, I'm isolating them in an environment, and I'm throwing in a Tasmanian devil. And I'm putting a fox in the hen house, and the hen house doors are locked. So yeah, very similar setup, different, obviously, story, but yeah, but you're talking about concentrating a group of people in an isolated environment, throwing in this whirling, this devil representative, and seeing how they react, and seeing how they get out of it, and seeing how they escape, if there is escape. So yeah, no, very much. I love I'm glad that these were the two books I did with Nightfire, because I do feel like they're sort of a pair, a yin and yang in a way, to your point. And so it makes me happy that those were my two Nightfire books. Because I do like them sort of being like kind of a set in a way. Whereas when you take, like, my other novels that are coming out, next year and beyond, I think are, very different. But yeah. And it was almost to the point where I remember having I've had the conversation with my agent being like, yeah, I'm basically just retelling Boys in the Valley, but with elderly people instead of kids. That's a joke. It's not a retelling, but yeah, but there's definitely that parallel there, and that kind of, and it was interesting. What's interesting about comparing and contrasting the two stories is that, like I said earlier, is tonally how different they are. Autumn Springs is funny, it's quirky, it's super dark, it's super thoughtful. There's definitely elements, emotional, moments, and whereas Boys, I think, was very much one note. But yeah, they're an interesting pair. I'm happy with the way they both turned out, and hopefully readers enjoy both of them.
Mm-hmm. I didn't realize it until Michael said it, but it does have a coming of age feel. The main thing, and I mean this completely complimentary, I think Mike already knows where I'm going with this, because we talk about it's a slasher and everything like that. I think you've written a giallo, and here's why. We have a central location. We have characters that we give a damn about. And typically, especially in modern slashers, when we watch, the characters, the victims, we have to figure out who the final girl is. With this, we know who the final girl is already. We know it's going to be Rose. And so, as I'm reading this book, I'm starting to see like in my mind, I'm imagining if this thing was a movie adaptation. I don't know why I'm bringing it up. Like it could be in the 80s. It was going to be like a Dario Argento, John Carpenter collaboration. And believe it or not, I would have someone like Joan Collins play Rose cast against type. Okay, because normally she played, the vamp and all that. So cast against type, and you'd have this music and all that, and it would like, dude, if you could set this in the 80s, man. But I just feel like, and a totally complimentary that you've written a giallo, and it's with thriller and coming of age elements that I hate using the word elevated, but it elevates it above a slasher. Um, it was so good, and it's
Thank
just
you.
and especially when you were talking about how it was like you felt that it was a little bit more colorful, and that's giallos are vibrant, whereas like slashers are just basically they're bloody, and so to me it's like if you have a vibrant world, it kind of leans to being a giallo.
Yeah, it's basically a rom-com.
That too. 100%. Yeah. It's many things at once.
There's a romance element. Yeah, there's a will they won't they element. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think one of the things that makes this book unique is that it is so, you could describe it in so many different ways, and it's so hard to categorize. And even to the point that when Nightfire was putting it out, I said, I really wanted them to publish it under the category of a thriller versus horror, because I thought that was much more in line with what it was. But they're a horror imprint, so horror it is. But it does have some there's a little supernatural and there's some horror in there for sure. But yeah, so the categorization has been interesting, and it's actually been. I don't read my thing with reviews is I read reviews before a book comes out or before a book is released, and I don't read reviews after a book is released unless it's by a trade press. But because I want to know how a book is being received. But I'm also not a masochist. So, but it was interesting, early on because because I think what happened was Nightfire was sending the book out to a lot of horror reviewers, and the horror reviewers were kind of like, it's more of a mystery thriller, but there's also some horror elements, but it's not like traditional horror. And they're almost like you were saying, like it was a little bit like, watered down horror or whatever, mainstream horror or whatever. But then what was interesting was in Macmillan Audio sent out the audiobook advances to mystery readers. And so all of a sudden I was seeing this flood of reviews from people who were getting the audiobook who were like, yo, I thought this was like a cozy mystery. I don't need to know what somebody's insides look like when they're cut open. You know what I mean? And it was funny to see how the horror writers were coming at it from one direction and the cozy mystery folks were coming at it from another direction. They all kind of like had to meet in the middle. It was very gratifying for me because I was just, I was having kind of a good time reading a lot of those reviews because it was funny to see how hard it is, when you can't categorize something and how people kind of like respond to that and how they kind of have to sort of like, oh, wait a minute, this is not what I expected. And it was similar with when I published Third Rule of Time Travel, which is a science fiction novel, and a lot of my horror readers were a little thrown by that because they were like, well, wait a minute, there's some scary stuff, but it's basically a science fiction thriller, sci-fi psychological thriller, which it is. And but it's always interesting to me how things are categorized or labeled. And I'm such a big believer in not doing that. I love to tell a good story. My stuff does lean dark, but I think you could classify a lot of my novels as horror or thrillers, you know, and you'd be right, or even mysteries, and you'd still be right. So I think there are some extreme examples, like Gothic is definitely a horror novel. But Autumn Springs is really more of a mystery, So um, it also points to just how broad horror has become, and how people are trying to fit stuff into that category versus trying to fit horror stuff into mystery category. Has been interesting change over the last handful of years as horror becomes more prevalent and more popular.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges of having a slasher framework, and I think Bob alluded to this, is how you make readers care for and empathize for characters in such a short period of time before brutally killing them. So I think that's something you really mastered. But I mean, what tips could you give people, or how did you approach this challenge yourself?
Yeah, it's something. So, try not to make it a long answer, but so basically, but it's okay. So I was writing literary fiction, and I use that term loosely for those rolling their eyes, non-genre fiction, um, for my whole life. I wasn't writing really horror fiction until 2015, but I'd written 3 novels and probably 100 short stories that I would classify as not genre. Character-based fiction, where I was exploring the dark psychological aspects of characters and blah, blah, blah. And then when I started writing horror in 2015, I was basically combining all of that experience of characterization, and character built and character driven stories with horror horror frameworks or horror tropes or whatever. And it was kind of combining those two things was I think sort of gave what I think sort of gives my work a little bit of a unique voice, and and I think it surprises people a lot to read a horror novel and they find themselves the characters being fully fleshed out, or find themselves empathizing with characters, and if you take, again, going back to Alter as an example, my story Alter, which is a short story, is 11,000 words. And I think the first 4,000 words of that story, the first quarter of that story, is basically you just as a reader, you're just meeting these kids who are going to a community swimming pool on a Saturday afternoon. And the horror doesn't really start till halfway, if not more than halfway through the story. So it's all a lot of, I don't want to call it setup, but it's world building, and it's also character building, and it's also like, investing. But to answer your question, so I think about that a lot, I guess is the point. And I always, my thing is always that in order for horror to be effective, you have to make the reader care about the characters, because if the readers don't care about the characters, then it's Friday the 13th part 9 and nobody gives a shit. If they die or don't die. And all they want to know is like, how fun is the kill? How creative is the kill? That's what they care about. They're not, you're not crying during Friday the during Friday the 13th part 4 or whatever. I don't know. I've never seen a Friday the 13th movie, so I don't know how many. I think there's like 9 of them, 10 of them. I don't know. But so for me, it's very important that the horror be fixed in reality, be grounded. The characters feel very grounded and very real, so that when things do happen to them, the reader is emotionally impacted. As far as techniques for doing that, there are ways. The best way to do it is to give the character traits that are relatable. So give them a memory. Have them tell a story about something they did that happened to them that a reader could probably relate to. You could do that in a paragraph. how you build the character. Let's take Angela in Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. We meet Angela in chapter 1, right? And in chapter 2, Angela meets the killer. So why do you care about Angela? Well, for one thing, you know that Angela's in a relationship or a budding relationship. She's holding hands with a man beneath the seats during a movie. You get a few lines of dialogue with her, where she comes off as likable and quirky. I describe her in ways where she wears a puffy white jacket and looks sort of like a marshmallow with legs. She has oversized glasses that make her eyes large and blue, and she says excitable things, and she's, so those are all little ways for me to introduce you to Angela and make you like her. And then Angela has an interaction with the killer. And this is not a spoiler, folks. This is chapter 1, and this is like the first 10 pages. So it's a little bit of a spoiler, but I guess. But that's like one example. I think backstory, limited, relatable, quickly told anecdotal backstory is big. It's very helpful, and it gets the reader to connect and empathize very quickly with the character. How you describe the character, and also the character's personality. So I can make a character very unlikable right away, or I can make them very likable right away. When people meet Tyson in Gothic, he's not likable. I didn't write him to be likable. I wrote him in a way that he would kind of rub folks the wrong way, and kind of like, you're kind of like, who is this guy? And not in a good way. Because that was sort of the point. And so it's just so those are those would be, I guess, the tools that are in the toolbox when you want to develop a character quickly. The things that you can mess around with is, like I said, description, personality, how they talk, and give them a little anecdote that makes the reader like them. There's the whole save the cat thing in movie screenwriting, and which is that a character will save a cat in the opening scene so that the viewer instantly likes them. And there's actually a movie, Guardsman. What's the with the English guys, and they're all like James Bond guys.
The Kingsman.
There's actually a scene early on in the first Kingsman movie where the main character literally saves a cat. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, because I know there are screenwriters all around the world laughing their asses off, and it was definitely intentional. But anyway, so those are the things that I would employ if I needed to make a character likable very quickly. I think later in the story, there's you get to meet Owen Duffield, and I think you get to meet Owen for about 3 pages, and I think those 3 pages are him reminiscing about a waterfall that he used to jump off when he was a kid, and then he kind of philosophizes a bit about memories. So you're instantly like connected to Owen, and he really hasn't done anything except lay there and think about something he did as a kid. So I guess that's a couple examples of maybe some things that I do to get the reader to buy in right before I drop the hammer, so to speak.
Now, because you mentioned Gothic and you mentioned a sequel coming next year, I'm wondering, of all your books, why did you decide this is the one to return to for the sequel?
Yeah, not a super smart decision by me financially. It's probably my least popular book. It's it's independently published. It's not a big 5 book. It's been out of print for like a year. There's so many reasons not to have returned to this world. But I always had an idea for a sequel, and two things. One is, Gothic is by no, in no way, shape, or form my most popular book, but when I've interacted with a lot of readers over the years, and while Boys in the Valley and maybe now Autumn Springs and even Third Rule of Time Travel are probably my most popular books, in the sense that they're the most mainstream or they sell the most copies. Gothic and A Child Alone with Strangers are the books that people are most passionate about. When I go to a convention, I can't tell you how many people come up to me and talk about Gothic. So I know people have a connection with that book, and it's a really fun world. It's the one world I created where anything goes. I mean, what I mean by anything goes means I don't have to, like, the handcuffs are off. Like, I am swinging, and I'm having a lot of fun, and there's like a lot of crazy moments, and it's like Evil Dead 2 on steroids, right? It's my Sam Raimi late night B movie. We're gonna have some fun with this, and leave all your thematic elements at the door, and let's go. So on one hand, I wanted to return to that world because I had so much fun writing that book, and I wanted to write this sequel that I had, and but then I had like all these other projects, and what's gonna, not to be crass, but what's gonna pay the bills, and what's, but what happened was Clash, my friends at Clash Books, Gothic went out of print with Cemetery. I pulled it from Cemetery Dance, who was the original publisher, and Clash said that they would publish the book, the reprint, but they would want a sequel. And I kind of said, well, you know what? It just so happens that I have a sequel that I'm really keen to write, and that was it. That was the decision. So they're going to they just put Gothic out last week, a couple weeks ago, November 11th. And Gothic 2 is coming out in April of 2027. And in between, they're also publishing my novel Serafina, which is coming out in April of 2026. So I did a 3-book deal with Clash, one of which was a sequel to Gothic. So so my decision to write it was kind of twofold. Creatively, I kind of wanted to just to write something for the pure love of writing again. I just kind of wanted to not think about parameters or justifications or political correctness or what's the editor going to think of this? Am I going to get away with this kind of stuff? And I just wanted to have fun again. And I thought this would be a really fun vehicle for that. And then secondarily, it's also because of this deal I made with this publisher. So for those two reasons, Gothic 2 is coming out.
Yeah, and we spoke before about the marketing and publicity, but I'm wondering, what has it looked like to return to, kind of publicizing a book that was out previously, but now because it's been re-released, you obviously need to get attention on that. And
Yeah.
I mean, in that vein, how much when you're publicizing are you concentrating on the new release or the most current work? And then how much are you trying to give attention to other work? Because this is one of the dilemmas that we have as well, because books don't have a sell-by date. It's not like once it's been out a number of years that's it. There's no point reading it. But for whatever reason, a lot of people and publications in the media, they favor wanting to only talk about the new thing.
Yeah. It was difficult because I was promoting Autumn Springs, and at the same time I had a paperback reissue of A Child Alone with Strangers coming out. Came out October 28th. And then I had Gothic coming out November 11th. And I couldn't promote them all. It was impossible. So I just focused on I focused on Autumn Springs. See, even I can't remember the 3 titles. And then did what I could to promote these other books being released. And the reality is you got to pick, what can I spend my time on and where can I focus? So I focused on Autumn Springs, knowing that Gothic and Child had already had their sort of like, they'd already been out before. People knew what they were. So I did some social media stuff. I put them in the newsletters, but I didn't make a big push for them. I couldn't. So, and I've run into that before, where I had, like I mentioned, I had Child and Homeless Strangers come out in November 22, Gothic February 23, Boys in the Valley July 23. You can't promote everything. It's exhausting. You need runway. So that's why you try and separate these things like 6 months apart or a year apart if you can. And I'm kind of at a point now where I've sort of caught up, where all my books are out now. They're back in print. I won't have to worry about Autumn Springs again until a year from now when the paperback comes out. But I have Serafina to promote in April. I have another story collection to promote in September. So you just got to like do what you can. And like for this book, it's getting X, Y, and Z. This book's only going to get Z. This book's only going to get Y, because you just can't do everything. So you just got to sort of like categorize it and pick and choose and do what you can without killing yourself, because otherwise, there's only so many hours in the day. And also there's only so much that people want to hear about. Like, nobody wants to see my constant, 16 posts a day about 6 different books. They won't even know what's happening. So it's hard. And you try to avoid these kind of situations. This was a situation where it just so happened that I had these 2 other books coming out while Autumn Springs was in full flow. And I just did what I could, but I'm hoping that next year Serafina sort of has its own pocket of release. Traps and Specters, which is my story collection, will have its own sort of pocket that'll come right around the heels of the Autumn Springs paperback release. So I'm already thinking ahead to next September. So I'll figure that all out, and I'll do what I can, but not everything gets the full Monty. Sometimes you just got to pick, you just got to take up. I won't elaborate on that metaphor, but sometimes you just got to pick and choose and do the best you can. It's a good problem to have, but it is a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of problems, I mean, what do you think is your biggest writing and creative struggle right now?
In what sense do you mean? Like project wise or generally speaking?
So, I mean, at the moment, you've achieved so much, and, you're now with these massive publishers, and, from the outsider's perspective, which we spoke about before, it's not always strictly syncing up with reality. Things look, really great. But if we look at kind of, I suppose, not just struggles, but what are the aspirations? What is it that you are kind of focused on achieving creatively and in terms of your writing life?
I mean, I think it's a good question. I will say, to address one thing you mentioned, is like, it's not, everything is not what it seems. And I think there was a moment earlier this year where I was having conversations with my agent saying, what am I going to do? Like, I'm done, because all these publishers were turning their backs on me. And it was scary, and this is 10 years in. This is after I'd done deals with the Orbits and the Night Fires. And, I found myself without a place to put my work. And I've since resolved that issue, but there was a period of, where it was a little touch and go, to the point where we were talking about pivoting away from horror. Maybe I write YA. Maybe I focus on science fiction. Like, so there's never a point, for me, there's never been a point in my career where I've been comfortable, where I've been like, okay, I can sit back now, I can put my hands behind my head, I can kick my feet up on my desk, and I can eat my laurels for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Because the reality is, the second you stop working, the second you go down. And you've got to keep driving, keep pushing, keep fighting, keep getting, keep writing, I can't tell you how hard I've had to work to keep things going in a positive direction, even this year. So my goal is very simple. My goal is just to keep, my goal is to keep doing enough so that I can keep doing what I'm doing for a living. And that means writing new material. That means coming up with new story ideas. That means finding publishers that want to work with me. It also means, like I mentioned this right, at the beginning of our chat, diversifying the workload. I know writers who are wildly popular writers who are struggling to find homes for work because of the environment, because things are evolving and changing and not everyone knows exactly what they want. And so, like, being able to work on comic books, being able to work on movie scripts, being like, I spent this past week working on a TV pitch. So that had nothing to do with, fiction. And, I wrote, I'm trying to get more comic work because I did the Creep Show and I've been meeting with comic publishers. I'm on the phone and emailing my film reps and my lawyer and my literary agent saying, where are we with this? Where are we with this? What else can we do? What else can we do? What else can I do? I'm constantly pushing. It's to the point where I'm sure I drive a lot of these guys, nuts, because I'm constantly like, where are we? Where are we? What else can we do? And I'm writing, and I know that I've got to get a book finished before the end of, whatever I said, February, whatever it's due. And I know that I have another book that I need to write next summer because I need to have something for 2028. So there's no rest period. There's no recess. There's no sitting back and, like I said, looking at the garden grow. I don't ever foresee that happening. I mean, I'm sure there are writers who have reached a certain amount of success and maybe have had enough financial stability where they can think that way. But I feel constantly behind the eight ball. I wake up every day in a borderline, I don't want to say in a borderline panic, but I would say I wake up every day anxious to get to work and to see and to find out, like, what I have to do that day to push things forward, even if it's an infinitesimal degree. So my focus is always making the donuts so that I have work to sell. And then beating the bushes on what's out there. What else can I be doing? What else can my representatives be doing? Constant follow-up. And then hoping things, and then hoping good things happen. I made I'm in the process of signing a new publishing deal. And the only thing I'm thinking about is, what am I going to do after this deal? That's the only thing I'm thinking about. This deal will get me through 2027. Okay, what's happening in 2028? That's the way my mind works. So everything I'm doing right now, except for this novel that I have to finish that's coming out in April of 2027, everything I'm doing right now is very much focused on 2028 and beyond. So, and also, everything that's happening right now with whether it be film adaptations or options or comic book or TV pitches or new stories to keep the Patreon going, or writing new books so that my agent has stuff to shop. So I don't know, that's a long-winded answer, but that's what my focus is. And that's what I think about every day, as far as like, so that I can get to the next day and keep doing what I love to do. And it's a day by day struggle. So I don't know. That's the way it is for me anyway.
And I think it's so useful and a sobering insight into the reality of the full-time writer and what's needed to sustain or to attempt to sustain that. Because, as we've alluded to, I mean, even you can put just the most work into it, and there's no guarantees in this business. You can
No.
try to maximize your chances by working bloody hard and working harder than everyone else and so-called hustling and following up and looking for opportunities. But all of that can increase your chances of so-called success, but it doesn't guarantee it.
Yeah. I mean, it helps, you can help your own odds for sure, and, but again, to your point, nothing is guaranteed. And even when something, like we talked earlier about the marketing stuff and Big Five, and that's why I almost I almost interrupted, because I was kind of like, when you were talking about, oh, well, when you still have to promote your own work, even if you have a Big Five deal, it's like, oh my God, it's not even a question mark. Like, yeah, you're, yeah, the sobering reality is that writing for a living is a lot of work, and it's a lot of hours, and it's a lot of it's God, I hate being this guy, but it's a lot of you receive a lot of negativity, you receive a lot of rejection, yes, and you just have to love it, what you do, and you have to be willing to work really hard to continue to do what you do. But there is no um, magic solution. There is no, there's no, bubble that you step into and float away like, Glenda. It's constantly battling, constantly fighting, constantly working, so that you can continue to do what you do. And like Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre was a USA Today bestseller. What does that mean? It means that a lot of people found the book. Does it mean that does it mean that somebody just wrote me a big check? And I'm going to go to Tahiti for a couple weeks? No, I haven't seen a check. And when I do see a check, it's not going to be enough to go to Tahiti. I can tell you that. So, no, it's it's for the love of the game, as it were. But but I never want to come off. I'm trying not to come off as cynical or negative, because it's a lot. It's because this is, it is fun, and it is like what you love. Then it's there's nothing better. It's like nothing better in the world than finishing a story or finishing a novel. I mean, that feeling of writing a scene where you're like, God damn, I nailed it, or you're surprised by the way it goes, or you're adrenalized because something happened that you never foresaw happening, and it's the coolest thing ever. And that's what makes it all worth it. And I think you can have some success in this business. And I think that you have to think of it as that of success being the ability to continue to do it. And for me, that's what success is. It's the ability to continue to do it. No more, no less. And there's a lot of ways to skin that cat. But yeah, the best way to do it is to create, better your own odds by putting in the work and in creating the stories and diversifying the type of work that you do. Those are all going to increase your odds at being successful.
All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us this evening. It's been a tremendous amount of fun. It's been hugely informative, and we absolutely cannot leave it 8 years until the next one.
No, please. I feel like we didn't even get to talk about the other 6 books that have come out
Yeah,
between the last time we spoke in 2017. But yeah, no, I'd love to come back on, and anytime you guys would have me, and talk about writing and all that good stuff. It's a lot of fun for me. So thank you for having me.
All right, an absolute pleasure. Now, where can our listeners and viewers connect with you?
I'm everywhere, man. I'm on my website is pfracassi.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky to a limited extent, Threads to a limited extent. But best places are Facebook and Instagram. And then if you want to go to my website, that's where that's the main information hub for all of my stuff. Books and stories and newsletter, and you can email me there and all that good stuff.
Okay. Well, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
No, I just I appreciate being here, and somebody very wise once told me early on that the greatest virtue for any successful writer is perseverance, and that's something I always want to pass along to writers: is persevere, believe in your voice, and you'll find success.
All right. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you so much for listening to the conversation with Philip Fracassi. Join us again next time when we will be talking to one of my favorite writers, Joe Hill. But if you would like to get that and every other episode ahead of the crowd, become our patron at patreon.com/thisishorror. This is the ultimate way to support me and This Is Horror as I take the podcast to the next level in 2026. But instead of saying vague things like, take the podcast to the next level, let me get specific. As of right now, there will be 2 This Is Horror podcast episodes a week. The first will land on Monday night in the US, and the second will land on Thursday night. In addition to the podcast, you are going to get video versions of the full conversation on youtube.com/@thisishorrorpodcast. And you're going to get inspirational short video clips posted throughout the week from both recent and archival podcast episodes at This Is Horror Podcast on both TikTok and Instagram. So if you're not following us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, now is the time to do so. And the handle for all of those is at This Is Horror Podcast. Now, I want to do the This Is Horror Podcast full time. I'm putting in the work to do it full time. And I hope you're going to really notice that, we're what, 13 years into it, but we're still leveling up. We're still getting better and better. And if you like This Is Horror and you want to support me and you want to help me do this full time and you want even more This Is Horror, the place to do so, the place to support the show, you know what I'm going to say, because I say it every week. And also because I said it a few minutes ago and you presumably don't have a memory problem. But just in case, patreon.com/thisishorror. Okay, before I wrap up, a quick advert break.
From the host of This Is Horror podcast comes a dark thriller of obsession, paranoia, and voyeurism. After relocating to a small coastal town, Brian discovers a hole that gazes into his neighbor's bedroom. Every night she dances and he peeps. Same song, same time, same wild and mesmerizing dance. But soon Brian suspects he's not the only one watching, and she's not the only one being watched. Their watching is The Wicker Man meets Body Double with a splash of Suspiria. They're Watching by Michael David Wilson and Bob Pastorella is available from thisishorror.co.uk, Amazon, and wherever good books are sold.
It was as if the video had unzipped my skin, slunk inside my tapered flesh, and become one with me.
From the creator of This Is Horror comes a new nightmare for the digital age, The Girl in the Video by Michael David Wilson. After a teacher receives a weirdly arousing video, his life descends into paranoia and obsession. More videos follow, each containing information no stranger could possibly know. But who's sending them, and what do they want? The answers may destroy everything and everyone he loves. The Girl in the Video is The Ring meets Fatal Attraction for the iPhone generation. Available now in paperback, ebook, and audio.
Now, I would be remiss if I ended the episode without plugging my own work. And awards season is upon us. And my dark comedy, Daddy's Boy, was released this year. So it's only fitting I remind you of that when you're considering what to nominate for an award. Though, what award Daddy's Boy would be up for, I don't know. Award for book with most sausages in it? Most dick jokes and euphemisms? The best book of the year to involve someone taking a cat for a walk? I'll be honest, I don't know of a better book. Is that arrogant for me to say? Not in general, but a better book that came out this year involving someone taking a cat for a walk. Now, some might argue, not incorrectly, I don't know of any other books where people take a cat for a walk that came out this year, or actually any year, but that is beside the point. Other things it might be up for. The best book of the year based in Kidderminster, England. The book to reference the UK television show Naked Attraction the most times. If any of that resonates with you, then firstly, fair play. You have a quirky taste. And secondly, do consider picking up a copy of my dark comedy, Daddy's Boy. It has been praised by talented writers such as Jason Pargin, Eric LaRocca, David Moody, Danger Slater, and Max Booth, among others. It's no doubt been panned by talented writers too, but I don't have names, as such writers have yet to share these feelings. But nonetheless, my ask of you is that you buy Daddy's Boy, eat some sausages, get nostalgic for 90s British references, and maybe have a laugh along the way too. Daddy's Boy by Michael David Wilson. So with that said, I'll see you next Thursday for the conversation with Joe Hill. But until then, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, read horror, keep on writing, and have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.